Hi, this is Scott Dudley from Funnel Fella Radio, and today we're going to be talking about buttons on the page and why buttons should actually look like buttons. So let's get stuck into it. So I've literally looked at thousands of funnels over the last 5 years or so, between building my own funnels, between building client funnels, and also working in tech support. And the one thing that really stands out to me is how many funnels are poorly designed with buttons that they don't even look like buttons. And just to go into a bit of detail, I'm going to give you some examples of a few different scenarios and why it's important to make sure that your buttons actually do look like buttons. All right, so the first example is submit buttons that look almost exactly the same as the label background colors on order forms. So just to explain that a bit, if you just imagine an order form and it's got all the fields on the order form, and quite often, particularly with ClickFunnels, the different sections of the order form will have label headings. So it might be for contact information and then billing information and then payment information, for example. And those headings will have a background color, which often is with rounded corners. So say, for example, the background color is blue. And then the button at the bottom to actually make the payment looks almost exactly the same as the label backgrounds, and it's got the same color blue as well. So basically you've got three label headings on the page and then a fourth one at the bottom to actually submit the button. And the thing is, they all blend into each other. They all look exactly the same, and the button just looks like another label. And I mean, in most cases, people will know, particularly if the call to action, which we'll talk about soon, particularly if the call to action says submit or make payment. But even so, for other people, you've got to really think of the average person. It can get quite confusing. And it doesn't. The point is, though, it doesn't actually look like a button. It just looks like another label on the page. All right, so the next one is buttons. The buttons that are the same, matching color scheme as the rest of the page, which is basically what I've just talked about here. So although it's not always the label backgrounds, it could be anything really. If your page is predominantly blue and white, for example, and then your button is blue with white text, then it doesn't stand out. The call to action needs to have contrast to the rest of the page. And I've already talked about this before in a few of the other podcast episodes, but that's why, my main colors are red and black with a white background, but my buttons are all green. And the reason why they're green and not red is because the green contrasts to the black and the red. It looks completely different, stands out on the page, and you want people to be focusing on these buttons and call to actions. And if they're the same color as everything else on the page, then it all just blends in and it loses its appeal. So that's why it's important to make sure that your buttons are in contrast to the color scheme that you're using. And really, all of these arguments about what's the best button color, it's completely missing the point, because it doesn't matter what color your button is. What matters is that the button actually contrasts to the rest of the page. And when you think about it, it's quite obvious. So the next one is big, huge buttons. So they might either be like super wide, taking up the entire length of the page, or it could be buttons that, are, say 3 or 4 lines, and usually a button will be, one line of text, and it will be maybe half or a third of the width of the screen, or even less. I know that these days it's quite common actually for some buttons to be the full length of the page, but in my opinion, it doesn't look like a button, and particularly if it doesn't have rounded corners, and if it doesn't have a proper call to action on it, and if it doesn't have an icon on it as well. If you've got a super long button, most people, or maybe not most people, but a lot of people, they won't even realize it's a button. All right, and the same thing, if your button is like 4 lines worth of text, then that doesn't look like a button either. That just looks like a headline with a background color. So yeah, no icons or arrows on a button to make it clear that it's actually a button. So usually you should put some sort of an icon or an arrow before the text that helps to make it actually look like a button. So for example, on a order form, then you might have a shopping cart or a trolley next to buy now or whatever. If it's, say, an opt-in page, you might have an arrow pointing, and then the text might say download now. But yeah, just having that icon actually on the button, then that definitely makes it look more like a button. So that would be highly recommended as well. And then now there's another one here which possibly should have been the first one on the list, and that is flat buttons that don't look anything like 3D. Now, if you go back 20 years ago, sort of back when the web was in its infancy, the majority of the buttons, they actually looked like buttons. They were 3D, and they stood out. Whereas these days, the tendency now is just to have flat buttons that are 2D. They don't look 3D at all. And once again, this is where the button can easily blend in with the rest of the page, particularly if you've got those label backgrounds that I was talking about before, where they're flat as well. So what I do when I'm building funnels in ClickFunnels is there's a special style, I can't remember the name of the tab now, it might be template or whatever, where it gives you a different range of certain styles of buttons, and there's one on there, a particular one that is a 3D button and it's green, and that's the one that I always choose, because a 3D button is going to look more like a button than a 2D button. And I mean, a lot of people listening to this is going to think, well, what difference does it make, 2D, 3D, it's a button for crying out loud. But when you're talking about making sales or, conversions, you want to make it as easy as possible for the person that's reached the page to understand exactly what they need to do. And particularly with older people, excuse me, some people they're not sure what they have to do. And if it's not crystal clear, then you can lose them. And, once you've lost somebody, there's a good chance that they won't come back. So why make it harder for someone when you can just make it easier by choosing a 3D button that actually looks like a button? All right, so buttons that are way down below the fold that most visitors will never even see. So this is another good point as well. This is more about the location of the button rather than the shape or size or color of the button. But if you've got a long page where people have to scroll down, to the very bottom a fair way to actually get to the call to action, then you're going to lose a lot of people as well. I can't see any reason, if that's the case, why you can't have like 3 or 4 buttons on the page. One button up as high as possible, and then you might have another 2 or 3 buttons, spaced evenly, and then one down the bottom, and they all do the same thing, which is to scroll down to the bottom of the page. But I mean, if somebody doesn't actually get to the bottom of the page, then they never even see your button. And it could be that they're looking for a call to action. They want to actually opt in or purchase. But if they don't see any call to action, or if it's not clear what to do, and if you're making them work and scroll and scroll and scroll, and if they don't want to read the text, then again, that's making things difficult for people unnecessarily. And that's why it's always best to have a button at the top of the page. And if you're going to have the order form or the actual form at the bottom of the page, then when they click on that button, it should scroll them automatically down to where the form is so that they can fill it in easily. So, I mean, that makes sense. It's obvious. And then the next one we've got here is buttons with really poor call to actions that make no sense. So, I mean, when it comes to call to action, it should ideally be written in a way that suggests that this is the exact action that you need to take. So if somebody is going to buy something, then it should say something like buy now, or yes please, I'd love to order, or submit your order, or anything that actually makes sense as to what the actual action is. If you're putting, vague, strange text on your buttons, which you might think is funny or appealing or something, but if the person doesn't actually understand, what the text is there for or what they're supposed to do, then again, that's just confusing the issue as well. So, if you want somebody to download something, then yeah, you just put download now as the text. Make it as short, as simple, as easy to understand as possible. Don't complicate it. Don't use weird jargon or, try to be cute or funny. Just make it as obvious as possible, so that the person doesn't have to think twice about what's going to happen when they click on the button. And then the final one that I've got here is, this one possibly is open for debate, but some studies have proven that some people will only click on a link and they won't click on a button. And if they don't see a link, then they won't click at all. So it can be worth testing both a link and a button together. So just for those people that are watching, this is a bit of a good flow chart here, which sort of backs up what I'm saying. So, some people might look at it, is this a button? Well, no, I'm not sure. Then if not, then it's a link. And then between the two of them there, they'll either click on the button or the link. And that sort of covers both bases, because again, you can't just take for granted that people are going to click on the button. Some people might be actually looking for a link and not a button, which might sound bizarre, but you'd be surprised. And at least if you're offering the option of both a button and a link, then that can improve your chances of actually getting a conversion. But once again, I mean, this is one of those things where it can be worth testing. It's best not to stick to best practices and to actually, see what works for your market, what doesn't work. This is just something that's an idea that I thought was worth mentioning. But, it could be quite possible that, it's a complete waste of time and you can just stick with the button. But anyway, that's a bit of a comprehensive run through on, some tips on setting up buttons to improve conversions. So hopefully you got a bit of value out of that, and I'll catch up with you on the next episode of Funnel Fella Radio. Talk to you soon. Bye.